Okay, so in this video, I'm going to be going over what I like about BattleTech. And especially what I like about the new BattleTech. And the number one thing I like about the new BattleTech is it's the old BattleTech. And what that means is the rules from 40 years ago are the same rules that they use today. Nothing's changed. You know, it's repackaged and reformatted to be more consumable, but the basic rules from the old game, here, let me see here, like this book, from like the 80s, early 90s, all the rules in here are still applicable to today. So any version that you play, with the exception of the WizKids ones, because that's different, BattleTech is the same thing. Unlike, certain other, miniatures science fiction games that are like 40,000 years in the future, these rules don't change every 6 months to a year, and you have to buy all new stuff, and you have to abandon everything you had and start over. So, like, I have a few models from back in the old days, some metal FASA models, some old FASA books. And I can still use them today with all this newfangled stuff. So the next thing I like is the model count with this game. A typical Lance, which is your team, consists of 4 models. You can play with as little as 1 versus 1 or 2 on 2, but a standard game is 4 models, and usually as a max is 6 models. And the reason why that is like one model would be like an entire platoon of regular soldiers in a normal science fiction game, because you got your right arm and your left arm, your right leg and your left leg, and there's like 10 or 20 different damage points per. And I'm going to give an example here. I'm going to dig into one of these here boxes. I haven't undone any of these boxes yet because I wanted to go through unboxings and like that kind of stuff before I split all this stuff up. But on here, you can see each one of these little dots under a different normal game would represent one whole model. So you'd have to have like 100 zillion little models under a different type of game, whereas you only need one model to represent that piece of equipment or that hardware. So your models last a lot longer in the game. They slowly take damage over time, and they slowly lose their battle effectiveness over time, but they're not out of it until they're out of it. So that's the other thing I like about this game. One of the other things I like is, which I didn't at first, is the hex grid map. But it really helps as far as knowing which way you're facing, knowing where you can move, where you can't move, and how far away things are, checking range. You don't need a tape measure. There's no arguing over like a 3/16 of an inch out of range. You're either in range, you're not in range. You either can move there or you can't move there. So the hex grid really works out. But it does take a little bit of investment to get some decent maps. In these boxes, they do have the paper maps, and they're not my favorite. They're not my favorite. I have a box here that I got several years ago, and I think it's a Kickstarter, and we'll go over it later, that has like actual board game cardboard map, which is pretty awesome. Yeah, those are the big deals. Another thing I really like is the lore. There's a lot of lore in this game that goes back all the way to the 80s, and it can be confusing and overwhelming at first, and it's very confusing because there's so many different eras and time periods, and like, when does this happen and when does that happen, and that gets confusing, but after a while you get to figure it out, and you can use as much or as little of it as you want. So that's why I like the game. In my next video, I'm going to go over like how to get started and like what you would need, what you don't need, nice to haves and need to haves for the game. So that'll be in my next video. Thanks for watching.